you're looking for political commentary, you come to places like this. Do you come to the Grammys too?
The Dan York State of Mind program is brought to you in part by Lookout Rhode Island and Takeo Comfort Solutions.
I don't know. There's all sorts of places that you go. That's not the essence of our conversation tonight, but it's just something that's on me. I'm thinking, wow, this is a very interesting time. Reverend Donald Anderson, who heads up the Rhode Island Council of Churches, is here tonight. He's got an interesting program that he says he was kind of playing on the low key until the word got out, and now it's been a very public conversation about congregations becoming sanctuary places, safe havens, in the rare chance that Donald Trump's administration starts to act up in a way that requires it. It's an interesting strategy. We'll talk to the Reverend, who's always accessible to us, coming up here in a couple of minutes. Nice to have you aboard. Good Monday. No football to talk about. It's kind of a weird time. There's plenty of snow to talk about. My back hurts. My shoulder hurts. The snowblower broke 2 seasons ago. I keep thinking that I'm young enough to do this. I don't think it's keeping me young. Anyway, snow shoveling is not my thing. But a lot of people must have been done with their shoveling or didn't worry about it because they went to East Providence High School yesterday afternoon. Just a quick note on this as we get started. A headline on the front page of the Providence Journal suggests that the crowd wants our federal delegation to do that, to roll up their sleeves and to get dirty. You know, good crowd. Some say, I don't know, I get a little nervous. The Journal has trouble counting. They never count a crowd accurately. They say some 800 people showed up, whatever. There's a big capacity there. And, you know, Sheldon loves this stuff, and Jack Reed, the establishment senator, our senior senator, always plays well, trying to sound like he's concerned about those who are active while he maintains his establishment position. Then again, the Democratic establishment position is not very Donald Trumpish in nature, so that ought to be good enough for the people who are there, but it's not. They're demanding resignations, and they're asking the federal delegation to demand the resignation of Donald Trump. I don't know, do you like blanket in the wind? Because that's what that is at this point. Until Donald Trump does something that requires either impeachment or resignation, I think everybody ought to start talking about issues that really matter to them and stop worrying about the dramatics. You know what I mean? In the meantime, there's plenty of dramatics going on the local side. Here's the Providence Journal with very creative graphics. They're doing a good job with their pictures and stuff. There you go. Gina Raimondo's report card. And, you know, this is always kind of a traditional thing that newspapers do. And, you know, we always ask for letter grades. You know, we ask letter grades from candidates who are running against incumbents. We're all about letter grades because we're kind of conditioned culturally to letter grades. And if it wasn't just so predictable, it would be provocative. Here are some of the letter grades. Okay, so the union guy gives Gina an A, and the smart growth guy who's on the liberal side of urban planning gives an A minus, and Wendy Schiller from Brown is a B plus, and Timothy Duffy from the Association of School Committees is a B plus because she has been pretty good on education stuff. And then you get this. Alan Fung gives her a D minus because Alan Fung is a B minus player as a candidate. Alan, duh. Do you have to be so obvious? Brandon Bell, he just likes to wreak havoc, so he gives a D minus. The interesting player in this, though, is Sam Bell from the Rhode Island Progressive Democrats. These are the people that showed up at East Providence High School and are, you can get off that now, Kev, but thank you. These are the people that are just absolutely they're almost incorrigible. But you know what? The First Amendment's a beautiful thing. So the biggest surprise of the letter grades was the progressive giving the incumbent Democratic governor a D. Does that mean they're going to run somebody against her? Well, it ain't going to be Peter Kilmartin. He gets a D for dunce. But that's not. Anyway, let's move on to the Grammys. We had a whole package we're going to play here for you. Beyonce, you know, not getting the big, was it the album of the year she lost to Adele on, the album of the year? And of course she had some artistic performance there, and it's always nice to celebrate pregnancy and all that kind of thing. We have some kind of headline here, don't we? There, Kev? This was the fun at the end, but J-Lo came out after Adele's open and just decided to make a political speech at the beginning, and it just seemed to stream all through the Grammys, and it's not a new phenomenon, but gosh almighty, I would just like to be able to watch one of these shows without being preached to. Is it that much That is some costume. Is it too much to ask? I don't know. Let's go to where the politics are right now. In Washington, Mr. Flynn, General Flynn, is in a little bit of trouble. The headline says it, and it's absolutely true. Here's a wrap-up from CBS from this weekend's stuff.
Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau is meeting with President Trump at the White House.
It is the job of the Canadian Prime Minister to have a constructive working relationship with the President of the United States, and that's exactly what I intend to do.
The two leaders disagree on a number of issues, including immigration and trade. President Trump has campaigned on a pending NAFTA, the trade agreement between the U.S., Mexico, and Canada. In 2015, Canada and the U.S. exchanged $575 billion worth of goods with each other.
The Keystone Pipeline.
But they do agree on the Keystone XL pipeline, which will run from Alberta, Canada to Nebraska.
I've been on the record for many years supporting it.
National Security Advisor Michael Flynn is expected to be on hand for some of the discussions with Prime Minister Trudeau. But CBS News has learned his job may be in jeopardy.
It's not for me to answer hypotheticals. It wouldn't be responsible. It's a sensitive matter.
General Flynn originally told officials he did not discuss U.S. sanctions with Russia's ambassador to the U.S. before President Trump took office. But U.S. intelligence agencies intercepted those calls.
I talked to General Flynn about that conversation.
Vice President Mike Pence is reportedly upset General Flynn misled him about the discussions prior to that appearance on Face the Nation.
And it should be. You know, the idea that General Flynn communicated with parties in Russia while not formally sworn in is a violation of a very old law, none of which have been enforced from one administration to the next, and really is not the kind of thing that will penalize him to the point where he'll be asked to leave. But fibbing about it, not being, it's never the act, it's always the cover-up. It's always the cover-up. And, you know, covering up over something silly as that, I mean, it's not silly, but it's just, it's not instructive to put the vice president out there more or less looking like he's either lying for you or he's not informed. That could cost him his gig, and it's very icy cold in terms of their weekend response on General Flynn, so keep in touch with that. Somebody ought to get fired, though. Did you see the official inaugural photo? If you read around the tie, no dream is too big, no challenge is too great, T.O. Very nice. No proofreaders at the White House. You know, does that stuff matter? I think it does. Like grammar and English teachers used to tell me it does. Let's talk about what we're talking about here. There are a couple of headlines that are the reason we asked our guests to come in. Raised by federal agents spread fear in immigrant communities. That's not a new concept for a lot of you. And here's one that is specific to our conversation. Religious leader calls for sanctuary congregations. And we welcome back Reverend Donald Anderson. Pastor, good to see you.
Good to be back. Thanks, Dan.
Before we get into your thing, just a thought on a lot of this very, very left pressure on our delegation, on it's everywhere right now.
Yeah, I think so. And, you know, there is some talk that there's a strategy for the far left to do what the far right did 8 years ago. How successful that will be is open to interpretation at this point, and time will tell. I think ultimately, though, we do have to have people who come together and who can forge compromise and who can forge real solutions for people. I'm not looking forward to 4 or 8 years of a whole group of people on one side and a whole group of people on the other side and very few people in the middle doing the things that need to be done for the people of the United States.
Are you suggesting do you put yourself in this far left group?
I would say that probably, I mean, I talk about my positions as being biblical. I think many people would say that my positions are very progressive. And so I'm certainly sympathetic to many progressive causes and political stances. And that's probably where I would be on most things. I think part of this, though, is a strategic issue for me, is what is the right strategy? How can we get things done for the people of the United States? And I think we live in a bubble if we think that there aren't a lot of people in this country who are just so not progressive that we can just jam things down people's throat. I think we have to come together and say, how do we make this work for the betterment of our whole country?
Speaking of the progressive group, do you have a thought on the young progressive leader there, Mr. Bell, giving the governor a D-?
Well, when I saw that in the paper, my first thought was, oh, and then I said, oh no, I get this, right? Because it's pressure. I think there is a lot of pressure being put on our Democratic leaders to move hard to the right. And it's going to be interesting to say, excuse me, the left, thank you, I'm sorry. I've got to get my directions right here. But we did see that. I mean, haven't we seen, even in our own state, we've had politicians who were more or less right of center, who during primaries have taken a harder turn to the right in order to win a primary and then had trouble coming back to center. We certainly have seen that in the federal government. And so I am concerned about pushing people too hard to the left, because then you have trouble coming back. And then how do you govern? How do you govern?
All right, when we come back, we'll talk about your program here, which is provocative to say the least. Stay with us. I remind you of some of the city issues when it comes to immigration. This from late last month.
Providence Mayor Jorge Elorza says the city will not be handing undocumented immigrants over to the feds.
We're not going to sacrifice any of our folks here in Providence.
His pledge comes after President Donald Trump signed an executive order that in part tells Homeland Security to identify so-called sanctuary cities that don't cooperate with Immigration and Customs Enforcement, or ICE.
We are going to restore the rule of law in the United States.
There's no set definition of what sanctuary city is. I have no problem with the term. Some people say we're not, some people say that we are. But what's important are the policies, and Providence has always been a sanctuary for immigrants, and it will continue to be that way. And in nowhere are we going to change our policies.
Elorza says Providence does cooperate with the feds, but does not go out of its way to ask the immigration status of people who have not committed a crime.
We will not be asking, we will not be acting as immigration officers.
Reverend Donald Anderson is taking matters into his own hands, seeking out churches, synagogues, and mosques willing to take in immigrants who fear being deported.
Should ICE decide to come into a house of worship, then there are those of us, people like myself and many others, who are willing to put our bodies in between ICE agents and those people, and if need be arrested.
And it's unknown at this time if any federal funding will be cut to Providence. The mayor says federal dollars make up 10% of the city's budget.
Yeah, the federal monies being cut is seems to be more of a myth than anything else. I know Donald Trump has suggested that it's under consideration, but there's really no law that supports reducing money to cities and towns based on not following, immigration guidelines. He's learning a little bit about the law when it comes to the travel ban. Was that high drama? I'll put myself in front. There are people who will put themselves in front, be arrested.
It's a response to a question.
Okay.
I get asked that. I mean, that is the big question once we get into any of these interviews. And I will tell you that this is, over the last few years, this has been the hottest thing that we've stumbled into of all the things we've done. And that is a question that invariably comes up. Are you willing to be arrested? How far are you willing to go? Are you willing to be arrested? The answer is yes. Do I want to be arrested? Absolutely not. I'm an old guy. I don't find that particularly appealing. But if that's what it takes, if it took that, then yes, I'm willing. And I know I'm not alone. I know there are other faith leaders and other people who would be happy to do that. But that is not what we're hoping for. We're hoping that we're putting a plan in place that we never have to implement.
Right. Context is important here, because you told me on the radio a couple of weeks ago that this is something that has been percolating nationwide. It's something that you were working on quietly until word got out, and then you had to respond to the work that you've been doing. Is this something that if word had not gotten out that you would still to this moment be working on quietly?
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, our concern was that once this really got to be a hot topic, once the concern was out there in the community, that we really needed to respond. Our particular concern was in response to an article in the New York Times a couple of weeks ago, which suggested that what might come first are actually rounding up Syrian refugees who are already here in the United States. And we have about 130 some Syrian refugees right here in Rhode Island. And so our concern was that maybe they would go after these people right away, and we would immediately have to find housing for these people. And so that's what kind of pushed this from behind the scenes, working, getting the hard work done, to going public. One of the things that's really important to realize is that if we're going to take responsibility for people 24/7, there's a lot that goes with that. It's not just a matter of providing food, but there's all of the things you'd normally think about. I worry about security, not so much from ICE, but I worry about somebody who is not necessarily stable, who finds out that in this particular house of worship, there's a family or some individuals being housed, that person, might come in and try to cause some degree of harm. We have to worry about if we have children and they're there for any period of time. How do
You've
we
been
keep
working
them up
on
with
these
their schoolwork?
logistics. You had a meeting recently.
So we had a meeting a week ago today. I initially expected 20 or 30 people to come to this meeting. Because there has been so much interest in this, over 200 people showed up at that meeting last week. We had about 25 Christian congregations and 3 Jewish congregations that were represented, as well as a number of other organizations.
I'm trying to figure out, based on the context, and I think it's important. By the way, how did this story leak out? Are you aware of how it leaked out, or how it became a public reported matter? I mean, it's not like a military secret that you were doing this. At the same time, you didn't call a press release, you didn't call a press conference, put out a press release, say, okay, here's the concept, we're going to start working on it. You were working on it for months,
right?
And so it gets out there. And I think it's really important, before people judge you one way or the other on this, to put that context into place. And I'm still struggling with whether or not the actual preparation is constructive to everybody's sanity and political sanity. You say there is a small but practical problem here, and I'm having trouble reconciling.
So here's the thing, Dan. We overlap sandboxes a little bit, but my sandbox is in the faith community. And in the faith community, for centuries, there has been a history of sanctuary. This is part of one of the things that faith communities have done for centuries. And so after the elections and the rhetoric and all that was happening, there was a conversation just began to happen at the grassroots level about, what will we do? Will we be a sanctuary congregation if that becomes necessary? And I started getting phone calls from congregations, from individuals. Have you heard anything? What's happening? And because we had contact with one national organization that's been doing refugee resettlement for years, in fact, I helped resettle some refugees from Poland back in the 70s in the church I was pastoring then with this particular group. We decided that let's do this right. Because there is a lot that you can't just raise your hand and say, we'll take people in 24/7. It's a lot of work that has to go in. The other thing is, what's happening is people are getting to know each other. And even if we never implement the sanctuary congregations, and to be honest with you, I hope we never have to, but even if we never do that, people are getting to know each other, they're working together, they're doing something that they think is constructive. We're building more bridges with the immigrant community as well as the broader faith community. So I think there are a lot of good things coming out of this, and that's what we want to do.
All right. When we come back, what's the long view of this whole immigration conversation? We'll talk about it next. Stay with us. Our president, one of the things that I think is going to be really interesting over the next couple of weeks is what the Trump administration response will be to the travel ban setback that they took in the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals. Again, the court only held up a federal judge's stay.
Right.
Whether there's 4 options. They can appeal the stay to the Supreme Court, which would be a dumb thing for them to do. They can ask for a larger appellate court. They can go back and argue in district court about the legitimacy of the ban, or they can write a new one.
Mm-hmm.
But it'll be interesting to see where the Trump people go on this, because this is the first time that they've been actually slapped by the other branch of government. And I think that will advise them on the overall immigration situation, don't you?
I do, and I think that one of the things that I hope, and this is my hopefulness, that will develop here is that we may yet open the door for some sort of meaningful, comprehensive immigration reform. You know, you may remember when George W. Bush was on his way out the door in that January, he was asked by a reporter, in 8 years, what's your greatest disappointment in 8 years? And he said, not passing comprehensive immigration reform. So there are people who are part of the Republican Party, the overwhelming majority of the Democratic Party, really want some sort of comprehensive immigration reform. And what's happening here is a crisis is being created. And I hope that out of that crisis, instead of some sort of knee-jerk reaction, which would be trying to round everybody up and us opening up sanctuary congregations, is that cooler heads will prevail, and that we can have some sort of movement toward the immigration reform we came close to a few years ago.
One of the confusing things, I think, for people is to be able to distinguish between that which is mostly the focus of the travel ban and that which is the southern border immigration issue. I mean, they all come under the same very large umbrella, but they're very different conversations. The immigration reform that we've been looking for is really southern based. Mexico, Latino, Hispanic, all of that, and trying to, the illegal immigrants that live here and what to do about that problem. The new problem that the Trump administration has, you could say, made for itself, is the overseas travel for refugees and people who are looking for visas and the like from countries that have and/or are worried about terrorism. We're worried about terrorism sponsorship. So that.
They are two different.
You see common ground between the two?
Well, I think that there are two very different policy questions that need to be addressed. But I think they come out of a similar mindset. I think they come out of a mindset that says you blame the other. And you do this in broad strokes. So you say the people coming over the border are all rapists and murderers. You say all the people coming out of these countries are Muslim terrorists. They're broad stroke issues that create fear to hopefully empower your agenda. That's what I see as being in common here.
Listen, the rapist and murder thing that started off his campaign has stuck, and he's never really pulled it back. I'm not sure he's used the same hyperbole when it comes to the Muslims, other than talking about Muslim ban. But everyone's got an interpretation. Do you think this will calm down in the next year or so? Let's just talk. That's the longest view I can even imagine discussing anyway. What do you think?
I'll tell you. Here's my concern about what we're talking about with sanctuaries. My concern is that this is an administration that loves optics, and they love optics that make it appear that they're doing something. And my concern is that if they lose in the courts and lose on those places, that where they do have control is to step up raids and those kinds of things. And in this administration might think that's a good thing. Others no, but this administration, they just might think it's a good thing. I'm concerned about that.
Thanks for coming. We'll stay tuned. Final word and we come back. Stay with us. Alrighty, the theme of this conversation that we had here tonight is an interesting one. There's a lot of fear and a lot of anxiety. I worry that this project that the Reverend's working on feeds that, but he makes a point, and that is at least they're rolling up their sleeves and working constructively on a project. It's those who have idle hands and active minds worrying about Donald Trump that probably are those to most worry about at this point. We'll see you on the radio tomorrow at 3 on WPRO, and Brian Newberry, Republican State Rep, will be our guest here tomorrow night. Good night.